Okay, cool. Welcome everybody to the weekly meeting for August 30th, 2018. We're hot on the heels of JupyterCon. We just finished up. I at least know some of the big feedback. So I think there's paper mill specific feedback and kind of where things went there. But I think one big thing is that the website needs editing to incorporate the nteract web. That is the Jupyter server extension. We need like a landing page for it, probably at /web, as well as making sure that the front page reads both. Right now, we made it like an easy call out action to install the desktop app, which is great because that's a really easy way for people to get started, but it doesn't help any people that are hoping to use it like on their current configurations. That was probably the big one. And then Matt met lots of people. We talked about workflows for the notebooks and stuff, and generally the Netflix nteract notebooks article went and took off like no other. And so people, it was really great having an article out just before JupyterCon, because then everybody was talking about it over the weekend and then at the booth like the entire time that we were there. So awesome.
I also tried to collect some of the things people either talked about or I found were difficult to explain and kind of capture them in the issues for paper mail in particular. Nteract, I think you actually hit on most of the things I heard that were like people were confused by or didn't quite get. So
people want the button in the classic notebook to be able to go into nteract. This is the one bit of feedback I got after my talk. That is a thing that people, they don't want to change their URLs manually. So that's one.
Of course not, yeah.
So what else is on the agenda for today?
Yeah. So some of the, at least for the sprints, I ended up wrapping up a few desktop things, and worked with someone on, there's this thing called Abjad Compile, and it lets you run, like, it basically lets you typeset music inside of your like kernel session, so you can kind of interactively make a composition. And the Abjad Compile thing is actually like an extension for Hydrogen. So Jeff, who's on our Slack too, he made a Hydrogen plugin that does this. Like if you run the code, it'll actually like render it in a separate pane, which is great because it's usually a lot of, like it's a long composition, not like just a tiny embedded snippet. So it was cool, and he had a poster. So Hydrogen got a lot of props at the conference as a result. Yeah, and then we moved all of the examples to nteract/examples. That got fully finished off this like week, which hopefully makes it easier for people to add in more notebooks and to curate ones. It's in a really nice setup too, where if you add a title to your notebook, and if you basically put it in a directory, like in that examples repository, nteract/examples, then it becomes a menu item on desktop. You can go File, Open Example Notebook, and then you can click, you have like Python, Node, and R, and then each of those has like their own notebook. So we had a bunch of hidden notebooks that weren't exposed on the desktop app. Now they are, and so people can look at them. Yeah, those are the big things from that. I'm continuing on the path for making it so that we can persist the metadata from the data explorer, as well as fix up some of the sizing issues. There's some hard-coded bits about what the size is, but data explorers needed more vertical space. We wanted to be able to just take up the whole area in the cell and not worry about overflow. So
I definitely oversold that at JupyterCon.
People loved it. They were like, "Wait, why hasn't this existed for years? Like, why isn't this there?" well, now it is. So it's something to work with. So a lot of people are really excited about that. So that was cool. So now we just need a way for them to actually be able to save their work when they change the chart. So yeah, we'll get there.
I had a few things on paper mail if you want, I can talk about.
Yeah.
So I actually started putting together 1.0 issue. I know people have talked about kind of like things that should be in here. I think we're actually pretty close in terms of like things that should be in the repo before we can maybe say like, hey, it's 1.0. And I would love some feedback if people want to like go through. It's the top issue or the last issue that was submitted to paper mail. And just like a few of the highlights were sort of, we've been talking about getting the test coverage up for a while, and looking, it pretty much just means we need to go make sure the S3 file is reworked and tested. I think we would get that done. And then a few ideas from things that have been kind of floating around that we latched onto in conversations at JupyterCon. One of them was the idea of adding engine, -- engine. There was some desire, especially from Tim, to be able to point to a different execution point or path or service for the actual notebook run. And then one thing that I noticed in trying to talk to people is that the record pattern was definitely a little like how do you do it? It was a little off plane for the conversation when you're talking about notebook execution. So, and because record was kind of like put in but never really like come back and reworked, it seemed like it needed some better thought. So I made a ticket that was more focused on that, and I've asked a few people who have only a couple people put feedback in, but I've asked a few people that were using that feature to give feedback. And I was maybe thinking that we should make a new nteract little mini repo called Scrapbook to do kind of what record does, and then have record map into it for the short term.
Could you say a little bit about what record does? Because I'm thinking it may not be what I remembered it doing.
Yeah, so record basically saves a JSON payload into the metadata of the notebook that you're executing, and then
Okay.
Later you can read all that metadata back. So you can like read the metadata for a list of notebooks as a data frame, or just read the individual payload.
Okay, that actually is exactly what I thought it was. So why is that not in the scope of parameterized notebook execution?
No, it's not in the scope of parameterized notebook execution. It's a little like the capability, like think of paper mill as like all actions happening outside the notebook, right? I'm saying paper mill run a notebook, whereas importing paper mill inside the notebook, it's kind of, it was definitely at odds when I was describing to people like that capability, and it took them a long time to kind of understand it. And I think if for like just an isolation or abstraction, if that was instead like called something else, but did the same thing and maybe had more features, that would make more sense to people. Like paper mill runs your notebook, and then scrapbook is how you glue things into that notebook. And then it would be very easy to just say like, hey, these two capabilities are alongside each other. And it might even be that paper mill leaves like, some bindings into that in paper mill itself. It just seemed like something I want to have the discussion for, is if people felt strongly, and I haven't committed to anything. I just threw out the idea. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I would say that the metaphor that I'd be more drawn to would be collage than scrapbook, as that usually has more structure to it. But
yeah, so Tim posted on there definitely. His way he wanted just to stick stuff in my notebook. So we were trying to think of metaphors. I definitely posted on there. I think there's the idea of like the very well structured things you want to put in, and then there's just I know this isn't going to be readable everywhere, but just like shove this junk on the output of my notebook. It was an interesting, fun little conversation we had. And then we conspired about how we could get that merged without asking anyone else for permission. But no, I would go there. Like, definitely I would love some engagement on that conversation on that thread. And then I just put a couple other things at the end. One was like better out of memory crash experience. Just like the failure mode could do a little bit better. I think we want to like make that a little clear about the recovery or aspect of that execution by 1.0. And then the last thing was just getting a feeling of like how many languages kernels should be there for 1.0. There's a few common languages we don't have in there yet. It'd be pretty easy to add them, but if people have like, hey, we really should cover these things before we said like, the stable version is out. Anyway, those are some high-level ideas I tried to put into that. Would love more feedback and items put in there if people have opinions.
Is there an issue for the more languages kernels? Because if not, I will create it because I have thoughts about that.
No, you could put it in the checklist or make an issue. I do have an issue for individual languages that are missing. Like I added Julia just because I wanted to add a like new contributor friendly thing into the list. You could also just make one per language if you wanted, and then we could link them all to 1.0. Either way.
What I was thinking more was, actually switching it out and having sort of some docs that are specifically designed around writing language extensions, and then potentially
you didn't read the recent merge.
Oh, okay.
I merged that in before the sprint so that it would be there for Saturday.
So, but not just the docs, but then I was going to say, and then having like a normalized way so that if people wanted to have, say, we could use Python, what are they called? Entry points for people to register alternative, like extensions.
You should go read the translators PR. You will like it.
I'll go read it. I'm excited.
I think I implemented exactly that.
Okay, sweet.
I just basically pulled the code into a plug and play, like register like the IOs.
Great.
And then I tried to document it there's a developer guide that has like, hey, read contributors first, but this is like how to develop a new language or how to develop a new CLI option. And so I tried to put like a easy to read description. It was like a paragraph long, just about how to add something like that.
This is which PR?
It's close. It already merged. It's already in 15.
Okay.
Translator.
Okay, I'll look into it. In terms of the API layer, is this now being done through a class, or is it still a collection of functions that need to have special names?
It is a class that has specific class methods.
Okay. Oh yeah, if we have a class and we have like method names on that, I'm totally cool with that.
Yep,
it's more what it was before with things being hooked into each other based off of like.
Nope, they're classes, and it's a register, so it'll just read key. Key is
This looks beautiful.
Yeah, it looks pretty nice. There might be like little tweaks we want to do, but the structure's all there.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Matt. This is awesome.
Cool. And then I know that so Alex has gone on with Ion trying out styled components for us to do like experiment with rather than styled JSX. And I'd be curious to hear what Alex thinks of styled components and how awesome or not awesome they are.
Well, I think so far I'm finding them to be pretty awesome. I think if you'd have to look back at what we were doing in Ion before that got merged in, but essentially we had a styled JSX for our styles, and they were being created on the fly with this kind of complex class name creation, which looked a little weird, and I think probably made it harder for folks that want to start contributing a new component to figure out how to actually get the styles to work. And the styled components now, I think, are much more simple, and it's kind of works much more like what people are probably used to, where you can kind of chuck everything in a theme and just wrap your component directly in that. And yeah, it just feels much more intuitive, I would say. Yeah, liking it so far anyways, and it's definitely more readable, so if anybody checks out wanting to create a component, it'll just be easier, I think.
Is there a place to go to get started with that?
Yeah, to get started with creating a
components and playing with Ion. Yeah, I wanted to
sure.
The notes that we're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. So let's see. It's just the the GitHub Ion
Okay.
link, which I will
Got it.
post right now.
So just the README there.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the best place to start.
Yeah, it's the README right now is kind of aspirational because it's like, hey, here's all the components that we know that we want to do for this whole setup, and like we want to create a style guide for these. And so it's just like a new proving ground for us to make components, but for us to make a very opinionated suite of our own components, even if they're wrapping, other React components underneath. It's just the ones that we're going to use to build apps so that we have a nice consistent look and feel. Yeah.
I will say the look and feel has definitely been a draw for the Interact stuff. So I'm really glad that we've been keeping focused on that.
So I gotta say though, it's at its limits because the set of rubric that I created for stuff was to make each cell a card, and then to keep things fairly flat and minimal across the screen, have defined margins for where stuff was, but allow for like a full screen view. As we build new things, I don't have a good rubric for this stuff. So that's why I was like, okay, let's try codifying our style, like build a style guide. And that's been difficult as someone that has just been learning UI engineering over time, and learning UI design over time. So this is more just me being honest with it. We're all figuring it out. So it's good to hear the feedback, but secretly, I don't know if we totally know what we're doing.
Yeah. Oh, well, at least you admit it. Most projects just keep going well past that point. And they'll like 2 years, 5 years later, like, yeah, we didn't know what we were doing when we built that.
So we'll figure it out. We'll collaborate on it. So
That's what version numbers are for.
yeah, like cool. We're now on V7. We'll just skip a few here.
I do think it would help if we had a quick start section, like beyond the npm install save part, for this working on this repo. I'll create an issue.
Yeah, those are probably good ideas.
Which repo?
Oh, but if people haven't been paying attention, on at least the paper mill side, there was a lot more interest. I actually found whatever PyPi's stats were for downloads for paper mill, and it definitely spiked a lot as the talk or blog and the conference started. And then the number of contributors has gone up quite a bit. A lot of people have been submitting fixes and in the people that had already been contributing and people from outside. Like we now have Azure in 0.15. So someone added the Azure plugin to be able to read and write from Azure.
Nice.
And the test cover is 3.7, some other stuff like that. There were some oddities with a few of those things, but like people were just like, there was like a PR every like hour I was like having to look at. It was great.
Awesome. Well, is that everybody? Nikita showed up on the call. Nikita's down in Berkeley.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Nikita works on hydrogen. We actually talked about hydrogen things before you came in because of Abjad Compile. Jeff is on our Slack now. He had a cool poster featuring hydrogen.
Oh, cool. Oh.
Nice to meet you, Nikita.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys. Yeah, cool just seeing what people are up to.
Yeah, awesome.
Did people have any like questions on stuff? I know we've been like, there's been a lot of stuff moving and new people coming and projects that we haven't looked at in a while.
Because we put commuter in the post, we need to fix the commuter open source version.
Oh, yeah.
Babel 7 is out. So some of the things that were preventing it was because Next was in this weird thing where they tried adopting Babel early, and it was just like they were using a release candidate. Now it's fully out. The mono repo could be switched to Babel 7. We could, and then we could probably get all of our Next.js apps inside of the repo to be updated. And then the other super sweet thing, I'm just like propping up what Alex has done because he hasn't said, he could bring it up himself, but desktop integration tests. So now desktop is fully instrumented in a separate repository with its own suite of tests, which while it's doing integration tests for desktop, it's also just generally an integration test for all of our front end stuff. Like, because it actually boots up the full app, like full nteract app. It's almost easier than us trying to like instrument for the for like an app inside of Chrome or Firefox or whatever. Just
Yeah,
because
it's
we're
easier
like
than
hooked
a
into
headless browser test type thing.
Yeah, because we have full access to the menu, so we can just be like, hey, fire this menu action, fire these menu actions, and it propagates on through.
Actually, that's pretty nice.
So it's pretty cool. I've never, like, if you had told me like, 10 years ago, like, hey, there's this thing that you can build like a full app and just write regular front end code, and when you want to test it, you can drive the whole thing and fire up menu events. Yeah, I would have quit Qt back then. Anyway, it's good stuff.
I know. I think everyone assumed that like web browser testing would get easier by now.
It's pretty good. It's pretty
It
good.
is
Puppeteer is
easier
pretty
than it
nice.
was, but it's still like definitely not the most fun part of development.
So something cool. I don't know if you know. So semiotic, which we use in the Data Explorer, we take a screenshot of a gallery and then post it to issues, and we use like a headless browser. It's not really headless in this case, but like it takes a screenshot of the rendered view, and so Elijah can see if there's any visual regressions on every PR that comes in for semiotic. It's pretty awesome.
That's awesome. I've always wanted that in front end apps I've worked on. We've like always talked about it as the pipe dream of stuff that you want to be able to see. That's great.
We live in the future. So, yeah, awesome stuff. We're gonna run out of. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for the desktop testing and general integration testing, we should get an issue going just of all of the highest priority things to get in there. But I think now it shouldn't be that difficult to really add new things. But yeah, we should probably just get an issue going of all of the things we'd like to see get tested.
Awesome. Yeah, I can think off the top of my head that we could have the app open all of the examples from nteract examples. And I think the one at the very least, what we should do is run the what's effectively the markdown regression testing notebook that's inside of our examples folder, because it does a variety of inline and block maths, and then it makes assumptions about having AMS math enabled. I'm trying to remember what else, but it covers a lot of the use cases for what people end up expecting of what the Jupyter standard is for what's available through MathJax. So we want to make
At some point, it'd be great to actually set that down. Like,
just got to do it. So
Yep.
we're going to set it as our own and then go from there. Cool.
One other quick cool thing to mention, Ben has refactored the Data Explorer in Hydrogen into a plugin. I think it's still sitting on a PR right now, but it looks really awesome. So another cool Hydrogen thing to mention.
Yeah, that's like totally perfect for hydrogen. I love the plugin structure, and then it's not constrained as an output, and you can basically kind of dock. You can dock your extensions. I mean, that was the dream that we had for all this Atom stuff. Like, we'll just lean heavily on Atom to get everything we need. And it's all coming together. Now we need protocol stuff to show the variables in the workspace cross language. But yeah, protocol work. That's a different beast.
Speaking of protocol work, Kyle and I think others have come to a conclusion that we're going to try to avoid the term MIME types and only go with media types. Everyone and that can give nice, clear names for other things, like instead of transforms, media HTML, and
Yep.
all of that.
So much better.
Just
Everyone on the call's like, yay.
Was that
Now, were you
Nikita?
saying something,
yeah,
Nikki?
yeah. I was just wanting to comment on the variable explorer type stuff, because I've kind of been trying to do this with like my Python specific plugin, and I guess from my perspective, the reason that that's not happening is not because of protocols. It's because like the UI components aren't there. It's like you want to draw this nice table of variables. You want to you click on the variable and you open the visualizer or whatever, and like that is the part that I'm not seeing. Like I can just bring in.
I think the frame that Kyle was coming from is that if we want to implement this in a way that meets with the Jupyter standard of being able to be cross language, we have to be thinking of it from a protocol perspective, so that the messages can come back and forth from the kernel and we know how to handle them. And then it's up to kernel authors to be able to implement that. And then what the other side of that is, based on what that protocol is, that's going to determine what kind of UI we actually want to display. So for example, if you would type information in there, like we've been trying to do on the IPython side with Jedi, that pretty dramatically changes a lot of the information that you have to display and changes the UI paradigm. So we need to be thinking in those terms.
So I think Nikita, it might be useful then to have some of the folks that are doing UI. We could, if it helps to kick things off and get that started, we can always prototype with UI and then start determining what our messages are based on that. So I'm totally comfortable exploring that direction.
Good.
Especially if you already have steps forward on the Python side. That's exactly where this iteration needs to start.
Yeah, so I have something I have a basic data explorer where it just sends variable values all the time. And I don't know, I guess my approach would be just to keep hacking on this quasi protocol and just see what features do people care about, what do we actually want to display that's useful. And I mean, obviously there's a whole cross-language aspect, but I don't know how Jupyter works, but my impression was that everything was prototyped in Python first, and then that next step was made of how to make it multilingual.
Yes, that's definitely the case. It's just I was trying to say, as we're doing this, if there are things like types that don't come as easily to Python developers, it's useful to be forward compatible like that, just to be thinking along those terms.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, anything that you've got, is this in an issue or a PR somewhere?
So this is my Hydrogen Python plugin. I work on Hydrogen, so yeah, you just install it in Atom, and I think it's an optional feature. You have to activate it, and it just basically anytime you run something, it shows you what your current variable values are out in the sidebar. And the short summary of my competency with JavaScript is that as soon as there's any HTML, so yeah, you be prepared, I guess.
Audio cut out for everyone.
Oh, sorry, my connection's not the best.
Go ahead again.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that I have this plugin, it works. The UI is terrible because I don't know how to do UI. So, yeah.
Super cool though. I'll look into it. Thank you.
Cool. So we're just about out of time. We're actually a little over time. Matt even had to go to another meeting, it looks like. So we'll just go ahead and finish up. Thanks everybody for coming. I'll get it posted to YouTube shortly. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.